Hi boys and girls, today we're going to talk about borrowing when the minuend is not 1. In the last video that you watched how to borrow with fractions and whole numbers, but that whole number was always a 1. So the problems that you did look something like this. We had a 1, we crossed it out, changed it to a 0, and turned it into a fraction with the same denominator as the subtrahend, and you have to always make sure that that fraction equals a whole number. So whatever this subtrahend is, you put that number on the numerator as well. So we turned, in this particular case, we turned our 1 into 7/7, and then we were able to do 7/7 minus 2/7, and that equals 5/7. We did a lot of practice with that, with the minuend being 1. Well, today I'm going to show you how to subtract when the minuend is not 1. It's going to look something like this. What we're going to do is we're going to borrow from the minuend by taking 1 unit from the whole number and rewriting the unit as a fraction with a common denominator. That's a lot of information. Let's break it down. What that means is, in this case, I have 4 minus 2/3. I'm going to borrow from my minuend, which means I'm going to turn my 4 into a 3. That will give me 1 whole unit to work with as my fraction here. So if I take 1 away from my 4, I'll end up with 3. And I can take 3/3 from it. That would be my 1. And that will carry over into the fraction part here where we can subtract. So what I'll end up with is 3 3/3, which equals 4, minus 2/3. So 3/3 minus 2/3 equals 1/3. And of course 3 minus nothing equals 3. So in doing that, we borrowed from the minuend, we took 1 unit from the whole number, turned it into a 3, and we rewrote that 1 unit that we borrowed as a fraction with a common denominator. And the denominator here was 3. I want to take a minute to compare this to borrowing with whole numbers, because borrowing with fractions seems kind of complicated and confusing, but really it's all about place value. Here we have units and here we have parts of units. Well, if I want to borrow with whole numbers, let's just work a problem out so that we can remind ourselves that it's really not that complicated. And maybe by refreshing our minds about borrowing with whole numbers, we can feel a little more at ease with doing this kind of work. So when I borrow with whole numbers, I come over here, cross this out, I take 1 away, and I bring it over here. So 1 less than 9 becomes 8, and I bring my 1 over here. In the same way I did that here. I crossed out the 4, I turned it into a 3, and I brought that 1 over into the fraction spot. So 12 minus 7 is 5, and 8 minus 1 is 7. And just like here, I was able to work with these numbers. So 3/3 minus 2/3 equals 1/3, and 3 minus 0 equals 3. Here's another practice problem that I did. I had 1 minus 2/7. I had to borrow from my 1, and I turned my 1 into a 0 because 1 less than 1 is 0. I turned that 1 that I borrowed into a fraction with an equivalent denominator, and I'm working with sevenths here. So that meant my 1 had to equal 7/7. So what I ended up with, and I wrote equals over here, 7/7 minus 2/7. Now notice that I didn't change this fraction down here at all, just like I didn't change this fraction down here. This one will stay the same. We don't need to do anything with that subtrahend. We only want to worry about the minuend in this case. So 7/7 minus 2/7 equals 5/7. I'm going to work one more out for you, and then I'm going to give you your practice problem for tonight. This problem is 9 2/3. I'd like you to write this and work along with me. So I have 9 2/3. I want you to go ahead and cross out and do your borrowing. What that should look like is this. You borrowed, you're taking 1 away from your 9, which gives it an 8. And in parentheses, write the fraction that that whole number will become. You borrowed one whole unit, so that one whole unit needs to turn into a fraction, and you can see that our denominator here is thirds. So what will that one unit be represented as a fraction? If you wrote 3/3, you are correct. Okay, so you should have this so far. Then we're going to write equal signs. So go ahead and do that. And then we're going to just write the fractions over here because that's all we're working with at the moment. Keeping this subtrahend the same. We don't want to change it. There's no reason to. Now we've got 3/3, which was our one whole unit that we borrowed. 3/3 minus 2/3, and we know that that equals 1/3. We don't want to forget about that whole number over here. 8 minus 0 is 8. And of course we circle our answer because sometimes we have to reduce, sometimes we have to turn improper fractions into mixed numbers, and we want to make sure we circle our answer so we're clear on what they are. I have two problems for you to do for your practice tonight. One of them is actually a little bit different than what we've done so far. It's a little bit of a challenge, but I think you can do it. The first problem is 4 minus 1/3. Remember to cross out, show that you've borrowed, put in parentheses what that fraction is. That will be representing your 1, your whole number that you borrowed, and then subtract. And over here I have 5 minus 3 1/2. Now this is different because all of the other problems that we've done didn't have a whole number down here next to the fraction. It's really not anything that I don't think you can handle. All you're going to do is subtract there. Okay, so make sure that you follow this model. You cross out, subtract 1 and write that number, and then represent that 1 that you've borrowed as a fraction, keeping the denominators the same. Write your equal sign, and then do your math. And of course, circle your answer, which I didn't do here. Bad example. Okay, so I'll show that to you one more time. Remember that you're working with thirds and halves. So remember that when you write your denominators to represent your whole numbers.